Today, we're breaking down the Everest winter climb, where one client pushed into the icefall under conditions most teams avoid. Fueled by overconfidence and the need to prove toughness, she dismissed the warnings meant to keep climbers alive. In the thin, freezing air, she made one minor gear adjustment, and in under 5 seconds, the situation was beyond recovery. It was January 23, 2019. The Khumbu Icefall lay between Everest Base Camp and Camp Firm as a broken field of blue ice and deep crevasse. 47 aluminum ladder sections bridged gaps that dropped into darkness beyond the reach of headlamps. At 5:15 a.m., the air temperature was measured negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind moved across the icefall at 12 to 15 miles per hour from the southwest. Relative humidity was 23%. Visibility remained clear under pre-dawn conditions. These measurements fell within the normal range for early morning crossings, which are scheduled before sunlight increases ice movement. Amanda Williams crossed the icefall as part of a guided commercial expedition. She carried a 35-pound pack that included camera equipment, along with standard climbing gear. She was 40 years old and owned a supplement company in Phoenix, Arizona. He had built a large social media following by posting fitness videos that focused on grip strength demonstrations. Her online content often showed her hanging from ledges, pull-up bars, and outdoor structures to display hand and forearm strength. Sponsorship agreements with fitness brands supported her business model. Amanda had trained in commercial gyms for 7 years and had 2 years of outdoor rock climbing experience. She had climbed sport routes rated 5.11 and 5.12 in Arizona and Nevada at elevations between 2,000 and 7,500 feet. She had not previously climbed above 8,000 feet before arriving at Everest Base Camp 6 days earlier. Her acclimatization included one rotation to Camp 1 at 19,500 feet. This met the minimum experience requirement for crossing the icefall, but did not reflect long-term high-altitude adaptation. At sea level, she weighed 195 pounds with low body fat and maintained strong cardiovascular conditioning. At base camp, her resting heart rate increased due to reduced oxygen levels, a normal response at that elevation. The Khumbu Icefall is a moving glacier that shifts several feet each day, opening deep crevasses and collapsing ice towers without warning. To cross it, Sherpa route teams install aluminum ladders, fixed ropes that are reset and adjusted constantly. Each ladder section measures about 10 feet long and 18 inches wide, with rungs spaced 1 foot apart. Multiple sections are tied together with 11mm static rope and anchored into solid blue ice using screws drilled 8 to 10 inches deep. Ladder section 23 spanned roughly 32 feet across a crevasse more than 100 feet deep. 3 ladder sections were joined together and supported by intermediate anchors to limit sag. The system was built to flex slightly under body weight, but remains secure if properly used with gloves and clipped safety lines. Aluminum retains cold efficiently. Overnight, temperatures near negative 18 degrees cause the metal to contract and remain close to ambient temperature until direct sunlight reached it. In those conditions, any moisture from skin can freeze instantly on contact, creating an ice bond strong enough to tear tissue if force is applied. On the morning of April 22nd, Amanda told her expedition cameraman, David Park, that she planned to cross one of the ladder sections without gloves to film a demonstration of grip strength. Park, a 28-year-old videographer from Los Angeles who had worked with Amanda on past projects, expressed concern but did not stop her. Amanda explained that she wanted footage that stood out from typical Everest videos and referred to past videos where she handled cold metal outdoors in Arizona, winter temperatures in the low 20s Fahrenheit. She did not account for the increased risk of skin freezing to metal at temperatures well below zero or for moisture buildup from exertion at high altitude. Park is prepared to film the crossing using a Sony A7S III camera with cold weather battery packs. The camera was set for low light with high ISO sensitivity and a shutter speed adjusted to capture motion. At 5:43 a.m. on April the 23rd, the team reached the approach to Section 23. The aluminum ladders stretched across a dark crevasse in pre-dawn light. The group included 8 climbers, 3 Sherpa guides, an expedition leader, Jake Morrison, an experienced high-altitude guide. Amanda's pulse oximeter reading showed 78% oxygen saturation, a common value at that elevation, but indicating reduced oxygen levels. Her heart rate measured 94 beats per minute, and her breathing rate had increased to 28 breaths per minute as her body adjusted to thinner air. These signs reflected physical strain typical at 18,200 feet, but also indicated that her body was under stress while preparing for the ladder crossing. Amanda removed both insulated climbing gloves and placed them in her pack, exposing her hands to air measured at negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit on the expedition thermometer. The gloves were heavy-duty insulated mitts designed for extreme cold. Removing them eliminated the layer of protection that prevented direct skin contact with frozen metal. Morrison immediately saw that Amanda's hands were bare, reminded her that crossing ladders without gloves went against established safety procedures. Audio from a nearby camera recorded Morrison stating that bare hand contact with metal in those conditions created a serious risk of injury, and that proceeding would go against company recommendations. Amanda indicated she understood the warning and chose to continue. The expedition agreement allowed clients to make certain personal equipment decisions, provided they accepted responsibility for deviations from recommended safety practices. Morrison repeated the warning and specifically mentioned the risk of skin freezing to metal surfaces. She documented the exchange in the expedition log, including the time and location. Wind speeds increased to approximately 18 miles per hour as Amanda stepped toward the first ladder. Wind chill lowered the effective temperature to near negative 36 degrees Fahrenheit. An infrared reading taken earlier showed the aluminum ladder surface at negative 17 degrees. Aluminum retains cold efficiently, and its surface temperature remained close to ambient conditions. Within less than a minute of removing her gloves, the temperature of Amanda's exposed hands dropped rapidly. Wind removed the thin layer of warmer air that normally forms around skin, accelerating heat loss. Blood flow to her fingers decreased as her body responded to the cold, reducing warmth in her hands. Sensitivity in her fingertips began to diminish. At 5:44 a.m., Amanda gripped the first aluminum rung with both bare hands. Each palm made contact across several square inches of surface. Her fingers wrapped around the 1.5-inch diameter rung, creating full contact between her skin and the metal. The temperature difference between her skin and the frozen aluminum caused rapid heat transfer from her hands into the metal. Because she had been climbing and exerting herself, her palms were slightly warmer than the surrounding air. Small amounts of moisture from normal perspiration were present on her skin. When that moisture touched the sub-zero aluminum, it began freezing immediately. The moisture on her palms froze the moment it touched the metal. Ice formed between her skin and the ladder, locking the two surfaces together. The freezing began at the tightest contact points where heat left her skin fastest. Within a few seconds, much of the surface of both palms had frozen to the metal. The bond created by the ice was strong enough to resist the normal pulling force. About 15 seconds after first touching the ladder, Amanda tried to shift her grip to begin moving forward. Her hands did not release. She applied more sideways force, but the frozen contact held. At first, the resistance appeared similar to normal friction. When she pulled harder, the ice bond still did not break. As she increased her effort, her body weight, along with the weight of her pack, began pulling downward while her hands remained fixed in place. Her arms straightened, and her body shifted into a hanging position. The load was transferred directly into her wrists. Her palms faced downward against the horizontal rung, and the angle at her wrists created bending force beyond what the joint structure is built to handle in suspension. She attempted to call out, but wind and distance reduced the volume of her voice. Only a partial word was audible before the strain on her body increased. Her full weight now depended entirely on the frozen contact between skin and metal. The load was uneven. Her left hand had slightly more surface contact with the rung, which caused her body to rotate and shift more weight onto the left wrist. Within seconds, the left wrist carried more force than the right, placing it closer to structural failure. At 5:41 a.m., a sharp cracking sound carried across the icefall. Several climbers later described it as distinct from shifting ice or ladder movement. The sound was consistent with cortical bone failing under sudden bending load. Amanda's left wrist was fractured at the distal third of the radius, and ulna approximately 1.5 inches above the joint. Later examination showed clean transverse breaks across both bones, a pattern typically produced by direct bending force rather than twisting. When her full body weight transferred downward through extended arms, the load exceeded what the wrist joint could tolerate in that fixed position. She weighed approximately 195 pounds and carried a 35-pound pack, placing roughly 230 pounds of force through her arm. Because her palms were frozen to the aluminum rung, her hands could not rotate or release. Her elbows were nearly locked, turning the forearm into a lever. The downward force created a bending moment, concentrated at the wrist joint. The ice adhesion did not need to exceed the tensile strength of bone. It only needed to prevent rotation long enough for bending stress to accumulate. The bone failed before the frozen contact released. Her left forearm was separated at the fracture site, while her palm remained attached to the rung. Soft tissue stretched briefly before tearing as her body continued dropping. With skeletal support gone on the left side, her weight shifted abruptly to the right wrist. The same bending force is developed on the opposite side. Within seconds, the right radius and ulna were fractured in a similar transverse pattern. Both hands remained adhered to the ladder long enough for both wrists to fail structurally. Once the bone support collapsed, sections of soft tissue separated from the palms where adhesion was strongest. Her body dropped free. She fell approximately 12 feet before striking the first ice ledge. A fall from 12 feet results in an impact speed of roughly 19 miles per hour under gravity. The impact occurred primarily on her left shoulder and hip. That collision absorbed part of her kinetic energy. The clavicle was fractured, and the shoulder took a significant portion of the force. Because the ledge was angled and partially coated in hard ice, the impact redirected rather than stopped her motion. Energy is dissipated through bone fracture, soft tissue compression, and sliding friction against the ice surface. She did not come to rest. Instead, she rebounded and slipped off the ledge. She then fell approximately 43 feet to the next impact point. A free fall of that distance produces a speed of nearly 35 miles per hour. However, because she had already lost energy in the first collision, her velocity before the second impact was slightly lower than a pure, uninterrupted fall. Even so, the force remained severe. She struck the ice across her back and head. The surface at that depth consisted of dense, blue glacial ice with minimal energy absorption capacity. The impact caused multiple thoracic spinal fractures and a high cervical fracture dislocation, consistent with axial loading and rapid deceleration. Severe traumatic brain injury occurred at this stage. Loss of consciousness would have been immediate due to the combined brain and cervical spine trauma. After the second impact, her body did not stop completely. The slope angle and rebound mechanics allowed continued downward motion. She slid briefly and then dropped the remaining 45 feet to the floor of the crevasse. A 45-foot fall produces an impact speed of nearly 37 miles per hour. Because energy had already been dissipated during prior impacts, the final velocity was influenced by tumbling and friction against the ice walls. Even with partial energy loss, the third impact delivered enough force to cause extensive internal injuries, including additional rib fractures, lung contusions, and organ damage. The total vertical distance from the ladder surface to the crevasse floor measured approximately 100 feet. The impacts occurred in stages, with energy dissipated through each collision, but the injuries sustained during the second impact were already incompatible with survival. The sequence from initial wrist fracture to final impact lasted only a few seconds. Above, sections of palm tissue remained frozen to the aluminum rung, marking the exact point where the mechanical chain began. If you want real breakdowns of high-altitude decisions and the mechanics behind how they fail, make sure you're subscribed. The force generated by the cumulative impacts exceeded survivable limits. In trauma medicine, falls from heights greater than 40 feet onto rigid surfaces carry extremely high mortality rates due to rapid deceleration forces transmitted through the skull, spine, and internal organs. Amanda fell a total of approximately 100 feet, striking dense glacial ice at multiple points. The second impact alone involved sufficient energy to produce a catastrophic cervical spine fracture dislocation and severe traumatic brain injury. The final impact compounded thoracic trauma, including multiple rib fractures, pulmonary contusions, and internal organ rupture. Based on the injury pattern and mechanism of force transfer, death would have occurred within seconds of the high-energy spinal and cranial injuries sustained during the second impact. Her body came to rest face down on the crevasse floor. The environment at that depth consisted of compacted blue ice with minimal capacity to absorb kinetic energy. During the initial separation at the ladder, both hands detached from the rung as structural support failed. However, large sections of palmar skin and soft tissue remained frozen to the aluminum surface above. The adhered tissue included full-thickness skin from both palms and extended into multiple fingers, where the contact area had been greatest. The thumbs detached at the base joints during the fall and descended with the body. The tissue left on the rung clearly matched the ladder's cylindrical contour, indicating prolonged full-surface contact before structural failure occurred. At 5:45 a.m., expedition cameraman David Park realized Amanda had not progressed across the ladder. She moved back toward Section 23 and observed blood droplets on the ice near the approach. Closer inspection revealed tissue frozen to the metal rung and no visual confirmation of Amanda on the far side. Park immediately radioed expedition leader Jake Morrison, who was approximately 200 feet ahead with the front group. Morrison halted the team and directed them to turn back. Navigating in reverse through the icefall required careful spacing due to narrow pathways bordered by crevasses and unstable sea wrecks. The return took several minutes. Morrison reached the ladder section at 5:52 a.m., accompanied by 2 Sherpa team members trained in high-altitude technical rescue. From the ladder surface, she assessed the scene. Visible tissue on the rung, blood staining near the crevasse edge, and the absence of any movement or audible response from below strongly indicated a fatal fall. She immediately contacted Base Camp Medical Coordinator Dr. Kim and initiated deployment of the technical recovery team. By 6:03 a.m., a 4-member technical rescue team reached ladder section 23 with 300 feet of 10.5 millimeter dynamic rope, a mechanical haul system rated for 600-pound loads, medical equipment including a portable AED and trauma supplies, and body recovery materials including a rescue litter and body bag. The team composition included Morrison, Pemba Sherpa, Mingma Sherpa, and Dawa Sherpa, the head Icefall doctor with 18 years of Everest route maintenance experience. They established anchor systems using ice screws rated for 40 kilonewton loads, positioning the primary anchor 25 feet from the crevasse edge to prevent additional ice collapse. The anchor consisted of 3 ice screws placed in a triangular pattern with load distributing webbing connecting them to create a single master point. A backup anchor system was established at 45 feet distance using an identical configuration, with both systems connected through the rope system to provide redundancy in case of primary anchor failure. Morrison descended into the crevasse using controlled rappel techniques, with her descent managed through a belay system operated by Pemba Sherpa at the surface. The descent rate of approximately 3 feet per minute allowed Morrison to assess ice stability during the descent and avoid disturbing potentially unstable ice formations that could trigger secondary collapse. The vertical descent distance of 100 feet required 33 minutes of careful rappelling through the confined space of the crevasse, with Morrison using her headlamp and a handheld spotlight to navigate past the 2 intermediate ice shelves where Amanda had impacted during her fall. Morrison reached Amanda's position at 6:48 a.m. and conducted an initial assessment following wilderness first responder protocols. Her findings confirmed no pulse detection at the carotid artery, no respiratory activity observable through chest rise or breath condensation, no response to verbal stimuli, and no response to painful stimuli applied to the sternum. The extensive trauma visible across Amanda's body, including obvious deformity of the skull, unnatural positioning of the cervical spine, and the bilateral wrist fractures with exposed bone ends, indicated injuries incompatible with life. The ambient temperature at the crevasse floor measured negative 12 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 6 degrees warmer than the surface temperature due to reduced wind exposure and the insulating effect of the surrounding ice walls. Morrison documented Amanda's body position, photographed the scene for investigation purposes, and began preparing the body for recovery operations. Morrison initiated body recovery procedures following established protocols for technical rescue in confined spaces. Amanda's body weight plus equipment totaled 230 pounds, requiring a haul system with a mechanical advantage to lift the load vertically through 100 feet of elevation. The team employed a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage system using pulleys, requiring 77 pounds of input force from the surface team to raise the 230-pound load, plus additional force to overcome friction in the pulley system and rope drag against ice surfaces. The recovery operation was complicated by Amanda's body positioning and equipment entanglement. Her climbing harness had twisted during the fall, and her pack straps had caught on an ice protrusion, requiring Morrison to carefully reposition the body and secure it in the rescue litter before beginning the vertical haul. The litter, a rigid aluminum frame with nylon mesh panels, provided structural support that prevented further injury to Amanda's body during the recovery process. At 7:23 a.m., the recovery team encountered additional complexity at the ladder surface, where tissue remained bonded to the metal rungs. The tissue could not be left in place due to both ethical considerations regarding body recovery and practical concerns about the psychological impact on subsequent climbers who would use the ladder. Removal required careful warming of the metal surface using portable propane heating units carried by the Sherpa team members. The heating process required 12 minutes to raise the aluminum surface temperature from negative 17 degrees Fahrenheit to positive 35 degrees Fahrenheit, the threshold at which the ice crystals bonding the tissue to the metal would melt sufficiently to allow separation. The team applied heat gradually to avoid thermal shock that could damage the tissue further, using infrared thermometers to monitor surface temperature and ensure even heating across the bonded area. Once the tissue was separated from the ladder, it was carefully collected and placed in sealed bags for transport with Amanda's body, ensuring complete body recovery for forensic examination and family burial preferences. The tissue showed clear impressions of the ladder rung patterns on the palmar surfaces, providing physical evidence of the contact mechanism that would later be documented in the investigation report. At 7:35 a.m., Amanda's body was successfully recovered to the surface level. Total recovery time measured 92 minutes from Morrison's initial descent to final body recovery at the surface. The team immediately initiated body transport to Base Camp Medical Facility, located 1.2 miles across icefall terrain. The transport required careful navigation through the remaining ladder crossings and crevasse passages, with 6 team members sharing the carrying load in rotating shifts to manage the physical demands of transporting 230 pounds across technical terrain at 18,000 feet elevation. The transport moved slowly at approximately 0.3 miles per hour, with repeated stops due to the physical demands on the team. At 8:47 a.m., Amanda's body arrived at base camp, where Dr. Kim confirmed death and documented extensive traumatic injuries, including bilateral wrist fractures, severe palm tissue loss, rib and clavicle fracture, cervical spine separation at C2 to C3, severe head trauma, and multiple internal injuries. The assessment concluded that the cervical spine injury and brain trauma were independently fatal, with death occurring within seconds of the primary impact during the fall. Additional injuries sustained during the remainder of the fall were determined to have occurred after death. The expedition operator notified Amanda's next of kin and relevant authorities, including the Nepal Department of Tourism and the U.S. Embassy. The formal investigation determined that Amanda died from multiple traumatic injuries sustained during a 100-foot fall into a crevasse at 18,200 feet. Forensic analysis confirmed adhesion between her bare palms and the metal ladder occurred under sub-zero conditions, consistent with known ice bonding mechanisms. Metallurgical testing showed no ladder defects, and anchor systems functioned within design parameters. The investigation concluded the incident resulted from the removal of protective gloves and direct skin contact with sub-zero metal. After the investigation, expedition protocols were updated. Mandatory briefings now specifically address cold metal adhesion, and guides were given full authority to stop climbers who ignore protective equipment requirements. Ladder Section 23 was reinforced with additional anchor points, and clear warning signs were installed at the approach. The mountain did not change. The metal did not fail. The outcome began with one decision at 18,200 feet, proving that on Everest in the winter, the dumbest decision ever is the one that removes the only layer standing between skin and physics. Thank you for watching. For most videos like this, click here.